Okay. So welcome to our first interview for Recovery Month. I'm Lauridsen with LO Counseling and Wellness, licensed mental health counselor, master certified addictions professional, yoga teacher, and doTERRA wellness advocate. I'm here this month. I really wanted to highlight, based on National Recovery Month, September is National Recovery Month, and our focus for this year is on the faces of recovery. I really like doing interviews and sharing that experience, strength, and hope with people that I know and love and trust in recovery that can do more than just me talking at you and sharing stories. So I'm starting with the first person that came to mind when I think of who's really got an amazing life in recovery and has an amazing story to share. So I've known for, God, I think it might be almost 10 years now, or something close to that, somewhere around there, maybe even more. My good friend here, Jack Bloomfield. So we met and we were debating where we met a little bit ago. So it was either at a conference like Moments of Change, or it was at a networking meeting. But either way, we met a long time ago when it had to have been more than 10 years, because I felt like I was a little more of a baby therapist. And, he really introduced me to so many people and connected me with such an amazing experience of recovery in this field. And, just what has we always talk about how he's got that amazing voice, very calming voice. I mean, if you haven't done meditations yet, Jack, you really should.
I've been told that.
Yes. He's got that amazing radio voice. It's very calming and just such a force in recovery. And we'll talk a little bit about what he's willing to share in his story. I'm kind of a flexible, off the cuff kind of person. So I'll, bless his heart, he's going to let me throw questions at him and we'll see where it goes. And then also would love to have him share a little bit about what he's been doing in recovery business-wise and ways that he can support you as well, because he does amazing things. So Jack, I would love to have you start with anything that maybe you want to share that I didn't about yourself and just in general, and then, your recovery story, whatever it is that you want to share. What does that look like? You can start where you'd like, have it be as long as you'd like within reason, and then I'll go from there and maybe jump in with some questions if that's okay with you.
Sounds great.
Awesome.
Thank you for the opportunity. And I've been a big fan of yours too, since we met and got to know each other. So you said within reason. So if I get rambling, you can cut me off anytime you want.
Okay.
Which would be fine. But I have been in recovery for quite a long time. When we're at our meetings of recovery, we talk about our sobriety date. And that happens to be, it's maybe a place to start, is November 4th, 1975. So if you do the math, that's about 45 and a half years that I haven't had a drink or a drug.
Wait, can we say that one more time? Because that's just so amazing to me. How many years did you say?
That would be 45 and a half. And when I did go to my first recovery meeting, I didn't have a plan of staying sober. I was just scared to death that if I don't get help, I was really thinking about suicide on a daily basis. That's where drugs and alcohol had taken me. And it didn't take long. I think my first drink or drug was around age 12, and my last was right after my 20th birthday. Mm-hmm. And I was desperate for help. I did have a few people that said to me, what are you stopping for? You're not that bad. But basically what wasn't showing was my inside world. I had been arrested a bunch of times and got in trouble and got relationships all messed up. But what you couldn't really see was the inside, which was a desperate daily attempt to function somehow in the world without getting high. But then again, if you are addicted to drugs and alcohol, you have to get high. And then if you're using, then you're basically the remorse and all the other stuff you got to deal with, the guilt and the shame and the fear. So you can't I got to the point where I couldn't drink and drug, but I had to drink and drug, and basically didn't know how to make that work. And the last 2 years, age 18 and 19, there were many times that I thought about the only way out of this is to take my life. So that became very real, to start off our little interview here. But that became very real when I was 7 years clean and sober, and the youngest brother in my family, I come from a family of 5 boys, he did commit suicide. So my youngest brother committed suicide at age 23. I was 27. So the inner world that we didn't see in him was the same inner world that I had that nobody could really see. So yeah, I could have drank and drugged physically for another 20 years, physically, but emotionally and spiritually and internally, I was done. If I couldn't get help, I was basically thinking of checking out. And when my brother did it, it was so real as to how close I was. And he didn't. It wasn't
for you.
Yeah, it wasn't an accident. He put a gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. He was the best man in my wedding. And he was my closest brother because my 3 older brothers were the ones that were always away at boarding school. So me and my little brother were the ones that were always home. Now I'm not sure about how much I should talk about that, but I did come from an alcoholic background, alcoholic family. My mom was taken. There were 5 boys in this family from 1951 to 1958. 7 kids were born. That's how the Catholic families did it back then. And my folks were in therapy the year I was born, trying to fix their marriage in 1955. I learned a lot of this after I got into my own therapy world and started working on myself. But in 1960, the courts took 5 boys away from my mother because she was an active alcoholic, and my dad got custody. They were divorced 2 years now. And back in 1960, the fathers never got custody. It was always the moms got the custody. But the neighbors were calling saying, you have to get those children out of that house. They're not safe. My mom was out of control with drinking. So my dad got custody of 5 boys. He was a very active businessman, doing very well in business in New York City. So he had to hire people to take care of us. So I was pretty much raised by housekeepers, governesses, babysitters that my dad would hire. Unfortunately, he never asked me what I thought about, I was never invited into the interview process. So some of the people that took care of us were pretty beastly, if I can use that word. So yeah, and when I was 12, 13, and I found out what drugs and alcohol could do for me, it kind of changed my inner world to one where I thought, hey, maybe I can function. Because when I was a little kid, and I remember being I did the math. By the time I was in the 9th grade, I was in 10 schools. So moving around a lot, childhood divorce. And I was a new kid every year, and it was devastating to be the new kid. You walk in and everybody knows everybody, and I'm the new kid, and then I'm leaving again. And so when I was 12 and somebody handed me drugs, alcohol, whatever it was, no need to go into the details on that, it really gave me an inner sense that I loved. It was like, I feel okay. I feel I can function because I was just a scared, fearful, terrified kid throughout my childhood. So when I got a hold of drugs and alcohol, it gave me this sense of calm and being connected. And but that was 8 short years of path of destruction, because I didn't just use a little drugs or a little alcohol. I used a lot of drugs and a lot of alcohol. At 15 years old, I was sticking needles in my arms daily, shooting heroin, cocaine, morphine, various things. I became a criminal and broke into drugstores and knew what drugs to steal from the drugstore. They didn't have CVS's back then, and Walgreens. They had private pharmacies in these little towns. So, and we were just hanging out with kids that were doing that. And, it was crazy. I OD'd a few times, but was blessed and fortunate to find, the recovery that you're talking about today. Very fortunate that I found the rooms of recovery, and it wasn't my plan. I thought, there's no way I can live without getting high. There's no way, it can't happen. And one day led to 1 month, and 1 month led to 6 months. And the girl that I was in love with when I was drinking and drugging, we started talking about getting married. And with 2 years of sobriety, I ended up marrying this beautiful lady who 43 years later is still my wife. We sign up 1 year at a time. We re-up every year for another year, and things are going so well. We re-up for another year in April. But she was with me when I was drinking and drugging, and so she knew what that was like. And her father, who forbid her to ever see me when I was 18 and 19 years old, my name was in the newspaper a lot, all of those different things, forbid her to ever see me, to allow me in her house, to allow me on the property. And 2 years later, when I was sober, he offered to pay for the wedding. So, you know, I don't give myself a lot of credit. I give the recovery rooms the credit, because 2 years later, I was, you know, a whole different person, and he could see that. And so we got married at age 22, and you know, I'm going to be 66 in a couple of weeks, and we're still doing it. I had two beautiful children who are now, I'm kind of shocked when I say I have a 41-year-old son and a 37-year-old daughter who are fabulous. When they come to our house, it's a love fest. We really click all together. And they now have children. So they have 4 of their own. So we have 4 grandkids. And, you know, one of the things that in my recovery that I always, deep in my heart of hearts, and my kids don't even know this, although they know my history and they know my background. But when my daughter calls and says, I want to take my husband away for the weekend to celebrate his 40th birthday, would you guys watch the kids? You know, I just get choked up thinking about it. She doesn't quite understand what that means to me, the gift that I've been given, that I have a daughter who asks me if I'll take her kids. If there was some, you know, if you look at anybody who's a grandpa, and I've done, you know, I work in the field a little bit, I've done intervention. Sometimes the consequence for the grandpa is, until you get 90 days of sobriety, you can't see your grandkids. And if you got 3 or 4 little 4-year-old and 2-year-old grandkids, and you're a grandpa, but you know, there's family I worked with, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, but a family I was just working with, they made that ultimatum: grandpa cannot see the children until he has 90 days sobriety. The last event is he came to a little league game of an 8-year-old, his little grandson, and he was drunk. And he was sitting in the chair, and he tipped over in the chair, and he couldn't get up, and he embarrassed everybody. So, you know, my daughter trusts me, trusts my wife, and, you know, to have that, make that call, or, you know, like at her wedding, when she didn't have to think, do I invite my dad to the wedding? Because what if he's drunk? Or what if he gets up in front of everybody and says something and, like, you know, embarrasses me? She didn't have to think about that. She knows, she trusts me. She knows I'm there. My word is good. She knows I'm not going to be drunk. You know, so to have 2 kids that grew up in a sober home based on what I was brought up in. I mean, I don't ever remember seeing my mother drunk once, ever. But that was the story. She did end up dying, my mom, with 33 years of sobriety.
Wow.
In 2001, she passed away. She got sober in 1966 when I was 11. And which is kind of cool that she did turn it around. But, you know, back in those really little years of, you know, I think about my brother's suicide too, and therapy stuff. When he was born, they were in active separation when my brother was born. They were sleeping in separate bedrooms and trying to figure out how they could totally end their marriage. So I always think about my little brother who took his life. You know, he already basically had a big X going to start in the world, because, you know, there was not a couple taking care of them. There was not a sober mom taking care of him. And, you know, that was, you know, way back when the history starts, it's when the child's in the womb and comes out. What's going on there at that time?
Yeah.
So I actually live in the town, Parkland, where the Parkland shooting was. And 3 years ago, both of my kids went to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. They graduated from that school where that tragic shooting took place, but I read a long history of the young man who is the shooter. and his mom was a crack addict when he was in her tummy, for that 9 months. She was doing crack. So that kid was born as an addicted kid already. Thinking of the devastation that happens to children, that they don't have any choice. So
yeah,
sad stuff. And then adopted because the mom couldn't take care of him. He goes from a crack addicted mom to an adopted person. So anyway.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to be said for that. I always joke that, Freud was a little strange, a little crazy. In fact, used cocaine himself, but he knew a lot about, the childhood stuff and how much that can affect us, and that was one of the things I was thinking about as you were sharing your story. And as always, I learned new things about you. So thank you so much for being willing to share that. And, one of the things that has always stuck out for me is that you got sober so young, right before your 21st birthday, which is an incredible feat for anybody. And then
I understand the drinking age in a lot of states is 21, so I wasn't legally old enough to drink in most states. It was 18 in New York where I lived.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, for most kids, that's when and especially as you got older and now, because it is 21 there now, I hope so. But, that's when it starts. I mean, that's when it really starts, I should say. For someone who has an addiction, usually it starts right around the age you talked about, 12. And the earlier it starts, obviously, the more likely it is to become a problem, because that becomes a coping skill for you, not to mention the biological aspects that you talked about. But the other thing that sticks out for me is that it's been continuous recovery despite all of those things. After losing your brother to something as tragic as suicide, that would have been an easy reason to relapse, and of course you have all these amazing stories to share, and the fact that you broke that cycle in your family, which is incredible. Not only did you break that cycle, but and your kids grew up in a household that's almost becoming a rarity now, to have a 2-parent household that's very loving and connected and have that, is not everybody has that. So that's super amazing that you get to share that.
I count that gratitude every day. What a gift. And I've had a lot of help, and my spouse, my wife, is amazing. I would say that the 2 reasons that I'm sober today, one is because I'm active in a recovery program, but also that she is totally supportive. She knew me back then, she knows me now. And she's been supportive since day one.
And how amazing that I didn't know that she was with you through your addiction. I know you've been together for a long time, but I didn't know that piece. So isn't that amazing that she saw that potential in you and loved you through that,
Yeah.
Because that's not an easy place to be.
Yeah, the last year, our relationship, when I was 19, her dad moved to Maryland for a job transfer. So she moved down there for about 6 months. And that's really when I let loose, because I used to control it a little bit, because I wanted to, I loved her and I was 18 years old. And I'm thinking, the family that I came from, I'm thinking, man, wouldn't it be awesome to have a family? And I'm thinking about getting married, but I'm still getting high. I'm thinking of having children and a family and still getting high, but it still was in my heart of hearts that she was the girl I wanted to do this with. And then she moved back, and it's when I was at my worst. But again, today she doesn't like to take any of the credit, but she doesn't have any idea that, like, when my brother, died, I was 7 years sober. You said that could be an easy way to say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with this. It's too painful, because it was very painful. But I had great support from my support groups that I was in. But also, why wouldn't I get high? I had a wife that loved me and I loved her. I had a 2-year-old son, so those types of things were kind of like really important. That what are you going to give up if you relapse? It's so much to lose.
Yeah. Well, people talk a lot about the consequences, but the motivating factors, like what motivates you to stay sober, is, to me, is so much more important. In the early days, it might be the consequences, right? That might be enough to get you sober, but that's not going to be enough to keep you sober for most people, right? Because a lot of people go through that cycle over and over again, despite the consequence getting worse and worse, for sure. So for you, those motivating factors is huge. I'd love to hear a little bit about what helped you get and stay sober, other than your wife, right? Because it sounds like that was a big one for you. But what did your recovery look like, and what were the big highlights for you?
Well, I had to let go of a lot of relationships and friends that I had when I was getting high. That's one of the things they teach us in recovery, is that people, places, and things, you have to change those people, those places, and those things that connect you with getting high. Found myself with beginning to make lots of friendships that were much deeper and real in recovery, because we weren't using drugs together, we were staying sober together. So, you know, the friendships, the meetings I would go to, books I would read, started to learn about prayer and meditation. So every morning, you know, that's gotten now to about 45 minutes every morning. I'm doing, you know, breath work and meditation now, but, you know, it was 5 minutes back then. Every morning, 5 minutes, I would kind of check in a spiritual way about who I am, what I want to do, and, you know, ask for help from a higher power. But, you know, that's grown to be much deeper. But, you know, that type of thing, meetings, friends, you know, prayer and meditation, and, you know, my family. Now I have, you know, then I had a little girl. So now I have a little boy and a little girl, and you're kind of like, what a motivation that is for staying sober, because you want to be, you know, I always wanted to be in that family. And again, I've mentioned, you know, that I work a little bit in the field when I'm talking to families now. Sometimes I'm talking to a dad who's 50 years old and who's teetering whether he wants to get sober or not. And I said, but now your daughters are in college right now. And when they graduate from college, are they going to watch you there at the graduation?
Mm.
If you're sober 2 years from now, when your daughter graduates from college, you're going to be sitting in the audience looking up, and she's going to look down at you and be beaming, because there's my sober dad.
Mm.
Or there's going to be an empty chair and somebody's going, where's your dad? Oh, I don't want to see my dad. I'm done with my dad. And I've met many people in recovery who are, I'm done with my dad. Or, you know, when she's getting married, when she's 30 and she has, you know, a marriage, is she going to invite you to the wedding if you're still drinking? Or is she going to be thrilled that you're 8 years sober and my dad's going to get up and talk in front of 200 people and say how grateful he is that he's, you know, my father? What's that going to be like for you? And so those are the types of things that people have to make decisions. And sometimes children are a big, huge influence, whether they're 5 and 2 or whether they're 22 and 20, because, you know, it's this, one of the saddest things I'll never forget is a friend of mine who passed away a few years ago with 27 years of sobriety. And he started crying one day, telling me the story that he's been trying to connect with his daughters since he got sober. 27 years. The guy was helping tons of people in recovery. He was helping people go shopping that didn't have a car. I mean, the guy was amazing what he did. So when he passed away, or we had lunch one day and he was crying, telling me the story. That's the worst part of his sobriety, is he can't connect with his daughters. They want nothing to do with it. All they remember is when they were 16 and 18 and he was a drunken father who didn't come home for a week at a time, or he was fall asleep in the snowbank in front of the house and the police have to come and rush him to the hospital. He might freeze to death. And that's what they're looking at, that there's police cars and ambulances in front of their house. And so when I said to his wife asked me if I would do the memorial service, and I said I'd be honored. So I put together some things for the memorial service. And I said, look, you know, can we invite your 2 daughters to come? And she said, I called them, they don't want to come. So they wouldn't even come to their dad's memorial service because they hated him. His alcohol destroyed their childhood.
Yeah.
But they didn't know him. They wouldn't even give it a shot. That, you know, maybe my dad has changed, and that broke his heart. broke
Yeah.
the news. So it's a devastating thing, and that's why my gratitude that I have those relationships with my kids, and that if I do what I've been doing all this time, that's never going to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that it doesn't, I mean, 20, that's an amazing story, because I've heard stories like that, but I don't know if I've ever heard somebody sober that long and still unable to connect with their kids. And, so those consequences can be long lasting. It's
and
crazy.
this guy was an amazing human being. I mean, he was like 77 years old and just a beautiful guy who had a great heart. And he was sober 27 years, but he could never get his daughters to forget that part.
And again, staying sober despite that, because a lot of people I see, especially in the first, because a lot of times I'm seeing people who are still struggling, or they're newly in recovery. And it's when even when you've got your recovery together and you've got a program, it's when that first couple of years and the challenges start to come in, or something big happens in your life that can be such a high risk. And for him to deal with that whole time and be sober is amazing. So I'd love to hear from you in that especially that first couple of years. What were you talked about prayer and meditation. I understand you were also, and still are also, big in the rooms in 12 steps of recovery. So I'd love to hear, a little bit more about what that recovery program looked like for you, and what big challenges in those first couple of years that you experienced, and how you managed them.
Challenges. I will say that my desire to drink and drug left pretty much a few months after I was embracing recovery. So I didn't have a challenge that I always wanted to get high. It kind of left, and it's something that in the 12-step rooms, it's well known that many people who, if you surrender to the first step, saying you admit you're powerless over alcohol, that your life is unmanageable. I checked both of those immediately as soon as I saw them. Powerless over alcohol from the day I tried it. Life unmanageable, yeah, just about every relationship and person I love wants nothing to do with me. And I want to commit suicide. So let's see, is that unmanageable? Yeah, kind of. So challenges, I don't know, that's a tough one, because again, having a family and having small children and, I don't know. I can't remember back that far.
Yeah, I know that's a hard question, right? So the first couple, so you didn't get married till 2 years after you were sober, though, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what about the mental health stuff? I mean, did you have lingering depression or struggles with that? And what did you talked about going to therapy? So obviously you did more than, it wasn't just all of a sudden your desire to drink went away and then life was great and wonderful, right? Even though you have amazing things about your life.
Yeah. Well, there was actually a period of time that after I got sober and really didn't have a desire to go back to that old way of life, and my new way of life was really going well. I actually sidetracked just a little bit. I had another thing that helped me stay sober, is that when I was 15 years old, I started caddying at a golf course. And I started playing golf, still getting high, but the caddies, you can't lose your job because everybody's getting high on something. So you miss a day or two. But after I got sober, they asked me if I wanted to go to work in the pro shop. And I thought, if I go to work there, that job would lead me to a place where I could practice and play. And I got really good at golf. And I put the same passion into golf that I used to put into getting high, which was a lot of passion. And I turned pro when I was 21, and I tried to make a living playing golf. So I'm sober 2 years. I have a professional sports career going on that'll happen pretty quick, and I've got a family and little kids, and so that was an amazing, shocked me that look at what's happened in my life in a very short time. The short, quick story is at about age 25. I made a decision not to stay in the golf business as trying to play for golf for a living, but I stayed in the golf industry in sales. And I had a 22-year career in sales in the golf industry. So it was great. I was still, involved in that. I was financially making really good money, working for a great company. And so But, back to the question about therapy, I would say that I hit some bumps in the road at about year 10. Year 10 is when I think, and I was about 30 years old, 10 years sober. And I remember when I would leave a meeting, I would have people follow me out the door and go, "Hey, can I talk to you? I like your program. I need help. Can I get your number?" And I was such a good guy, and I didn't know what codependency was at the time, but I would give my number to all kinds of people because I didn't want them to not like me. I started to learn about the inner world. It still needed lots and lots of work. I was busy going to meetings and working the steps and helping people, but there was a whole inner world that was now starting to kick in that I could avoid for a long time, but at about age 30, I couldn't avoid it anymore. And a guy that I 12-stepped into the program, a few years previous, I was talking to him about some of the internal problems I'm having. Some of it was to do with my brother's death. Some of it was that I had, other things that, like anger that was inappropriate, with my kids, or with my wife. There was a couple of times I went into a rage, and I realized that's not even anger. I just went into a rage. It's like, because my 8-year-old son would not come out and celebrate his birthday. We had grandma there, grandpa, the cake, but he had a meltdown about something. And I went in his bedroom and I screamed at him at the top of my lungs, this far from his face. And that's when I said to my wife, I said, "There's something going on. I need more help. I got this anger thing. I've got, this needing to be loved and liked by people. Why couldn't I ever say to a guy at a meeting, you know what, I've already sponsoring enough guys, I can't really help you." But I had to give him my phone number, and then I get a call. "Hey, you gave me your phone number 2 years ago, and I'm in the XYZ mental institution, and I'm getting out tomorrow. Could I call you? Could we get together for coffee?" And I can't say, "Well, no, I'm really busy now." Meanwhile, I'm working. I'm coaching Little League. I'm teaching Sunday school at church. I'm sponsoring 4 or 5 people in the program. And I want some free time for myself, but I could never say no. So now when they call, and my wife would say, "It's George on the phone," and I go, "Who the hell is George?" But I was getting calls from people in recovery, and I'm 10 years sober. I'm 30 years old. I got a nice, beautiful, big home, a wife, kids. People go, "I want what you have." And I go, "You don't understand what's going on in the quiet world, in the quiet world again."
Mm-hmm.
And I'd have to take that call. Meanwhile, my daughter's in bed. She's, 7 years old, and she's waiting for daddy to come to bed and read her a book. But I couldn't say no to these needy people in recovery but I'm the one who gave them their number. I'm the one who said, "Call me if you're having problems." And then I would go up and my daughter's asleep, and I missed it again. It's like, wow, can't say no. And that's when I started jumping into therapy and realizing that, one time, an example was really huge, is when a guy asked me on the front steps of a meeting, "Would you be my sponsor?" And it was the first time after being in therapy that I said, "I really can't. I've got a full plate. Why don't you ask him, he'll give him your number." And I'm driving home and I'm beating myself up internally going, how could you say no? Somebody that needs help. So the next week on the same staircase, and this different guy comes up and says, "Hey, will you be my sponsor?" And I go, "I remember the beating I gave myself last week, driving home for 3 miles mentally." So I said yes. So I'm driving home going, "What the hell did you say yes for? You don't have time." So it was like, I said, I have a dysfunctional relationship with myself. That's where this guy who I 12-stepped into the program years before, when I started talking about this, he says, "Hey, I'm in a group that we meet every Thursday night for 2 hours, and it's a therapy group, and most of the people are in recovery. Would you ever want to come to it?" I used to be the guy, if somebody said therapy, I'd say, "Therapy, go read the big book and go help a newcomer and get out of yourself. You're too into yourself." Meanwhile, I'm dying. What I had to do was get into myself because I had a really dysfunctional relationship going on with me. So at about year 12, when I was crashing again with 12 years of sobriety, I was blessed and fortunate to find a very qualified therapist who was 15 years sober himself. He was an LMHC, and then there was about 8 people in this group, and I did about 5 years of very intensive therapy, and we went to places I never thought. When it was time to do some emotional work, and there was a lot of anger and rage that I had to deal with, he asked, and my mom is deceased, God bless her soul, had a lot of anger at some of the stories she told that I found out were lies. And when he asked 2 of the different women to play my mother in a role play the next week, both of them said, there's no way that I want to be there when Jack unloads that anger, because they could sense it and feel it. So that's when my therapist said, Jack, I got a suggestion. I want to give you a pamphlet. He gave me a pamphlet for a program in Pennsylvania called Breakthrough. And it's a 5.5-day intensive codependency week where there's, from morning, noon, and night, you're doing intensive experiential work. And that still to this day, almost 28 years later, had a profound effect on my childhood issues, my family of origin stuff. Never realized that the pain in the corners of my psyche that I was still holding, that were just buried in there, and I was staying busy helping people and being a dad and working and making money. But when I got quiet and silent, it was not a pretty picture. And I crashed in sobriety. I really did. That would have been a good time to relapse, but I was, even with 12 years of sobriety, I even started to think about suicide again. Not about drinking, not about drinking. And I know a few people who have taken their life in sobriety.
Yeah.
They didn't know what was going on in their internal world, but I was, and I'm going, why am I thinking this? I have a beautiful family, wife, kids, home, job, AA and meetings and all this other stuff, and I want to die. What's that about?
Yeah.
So I was in this painful place, but I was the guy who said, you don't need therapy, right? And meanwhile, I'm crawling in with 12 years going, I need help. And it really transformed my life again for the second time. It was a combination of that and a new 12-step program in the late 80s called Adult Children of Alcoholics. I remember going there 2 miles down the street to a church, walking in there, 40 people in that room. I didn't know one of them. Meanwhile, everybody knew me in the other 12-step room down the road where I was helping save the world. I walk into this meeting and it gets around to my time to share, and I started crying in front of 40 strangers. And I said, can somebody help me? I'm lost. And I was the guy that everybody wanted what I had. Being sober. Yeah, I was sober, but I was like, can somebody help me? Because I'm lost. I need help.
I think that's such an amazing journey, first of all, right? To show so many things, and especially someone who is as successful and as accomplished as you are, it helps to recognize that recovery is a multifaceted process, and it's not just about not drinking and using, and it is very much so in the beginning. And for you, I mean, I think you're probably a smaller portion of people who get sober after the first time, right? So that's an amazing feat. And then having all of these things, because you had such positive things in your life, it probably took a little longer for that stuff to show up, but you had the commitment.
Well, I was staying very busy.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to listen.
Yeah. And that's very common, we can continue to avoid our stuff. Yeah. When we're sober,
taking care of others and staying busy and being on committees and never forget the first time at the church I was a member of, and they asked me to head up a committee, and I said no, I was in therapy, and I hung up the phone after saying I couldn't do it, because ask Jack, he'll do it. He always does it. He always helps, right? And I said no, and I'll never forget the feeling of what that was like. They're not going to be happy with me. And when you're a little kid coming from a place, I just want you to be happy with me. So I'll say yes, even though I don't want to do it.
Yeah. And a lot of people, I've actually had a lot of clients recently struggle with that, and that being part of the reason that they're continuing to drink and use is that difficulty with wanting to please everyone and wanting to take care of everyone and not wanting to deal with their stuff, because it's scary. I mean, I think that, again, you have an amazing story. A lot of people really fumble through that and continue to, stay in that cycle of not just addiction, but that cycle of depression and anxiety and trauma and all of those things. And they all get intertwined. And just the amazing empowerment of continuing that work and showing that, hey, listen, yes, I'm sober, but I'm still willing to continue working on myself through therapy, through continuing to go to 12-step programs and all of those things that helped you to be the man that you are, and being able to share that with the world, I think is amazing. Now, before we talk a little bit about what you do and how you continue to support in a healthier way people in recovery, right? Now that you've done some of that work yourself, what's something that you would say to someone who's still struggling right now to help them see the hope, to help them see beyond, especially someone who has a hard time staying sober, right? A lot of people, getting sober is one thing, but staying sober is the other. And you certainly take the cake over a lot of people with that. So what's something that you would say to someone in that position?
I think it really depends on where they're coming from. One thing that I always try and, if I'm talking to somebody who's struggling, have they ever been to a 12-step meeting? I try to get them to at least come to a couple of meetings, because they've never heard what goes on in those meetings. They've never heard somebody who struggled and relapsed 3 times and went to 4 rehabs. And now they're hearing it going, wow, maybe there's hope for me. I know that not every person doesn't have to go to an inpatient rehab. A lot of people get sober just going to 12-step meetings. I was one of them. They didn't have rehabs back in '75 that I know of. But, where's that person coming from? It really is sometimes one alcoholic or drug addict talking to another, and they get some kind of identification and they get some hope, a little light comes on. That's how the 12-step movement started with Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. And, Bill thought, if I can talk to another person that needs help, and then the light comes on for him, 2 guys started to stay sober with each other and lean on each other. And then there was a 3rd person. And now there's millions. But I think my goal would be to try to get somebody to be in a 12-step meeting, so they can see 20 or 30 people in a room and listen to stories and kind of go, wow, that guy just told my story. That happened to me. The first meeting that I went once. I didn't go for about 3 weeks. I drank and drug some more, and then I hit another bottom, and I went. And the guy that was telling the story was 22 years old, and he was a year and a half sober. And I couldn't believe it. And I asked him, could we talk after the meeting? And he came to my house for 2 hours. And when we were done, he goes, you want to go to a meeting tomorrow night? I went, yeah, I do.
Yeah.
And that was, I never knew that guy at that meeting was going to
You never know who's gonna, click for you, who's gonna be that, or what is gonna be that thing for you. And, some of the things that I hear in your story that are kind of the themes that we talk about in recovery and what helped you, and you tell me if this fits, is the fellowship is huge, right? Feeling like you're not alone is a big part of not just 12-step recovery, but, anything, the therapy piece, any of the other programs that are out there. Because, there are some people that might go, well, AA, I'm not doing that. Now, of course, we're going to encourage people to do that, but, knowing that there's other things out there, like therapy, like smart recovery, like all of those things is important. But the biggest thing is the fellowship, feeling like you're not the only person who's going through what you're going through. Having that support.
That's huge.
Huge, right? Having that support. And I also heard some church in there. So you had some other fellowship, right? You had your family, that family support. A lot more support even than a lot of people do in early recovery. So you definitely were very blessed in that, but having that, not feeling alone, having that support, having motivation, what motivates me, to better my life, what motivates me to move on from here. A sense of purpose, which doesn't always happen in the beginning, right? And that purpose changes. Sometimes it's throwing yourself into things that make you happy, joy, like you talked about your golf career and all of those things. work, something that gives you that sense of purpose, that sense of I'm contributing in some way to my life, to society. Love, of course, which all of those things can also become another way of avoiding our stuff too, right? So we have to be mindful of that. But there are also big reasons that people stay sober, and continuing to work on yourself, continuing to grow as a human being. I talk about the biopsychosocial spiritual model of recovery, and that's of life really, but of recovery specifically. And that's addressing all of those aspects of who you are as a human being, biologically, psychologically, socially, spiritually, whatever that looks like for you. And am I addressing all of those pieces in my life? And it sounds like you were, and that's a big part of how you've stayed sober for this long, and not just stayed sober, because that's only part of the story, right? It's being a happy human being, right? Growing as a person and becoming the person that you want to be, your highest self, if you will.
Well, I've been trying to achieve that, but I'm not there yet.
Well, it's a lifelong process, right? But you continue to grow, and you continue to, hopefully what I hear is enjoy the process. Not always, right? Because when we're growing, it's not always pleasant, but being able to enjoy that process and how you continue to do that. And one of the things they talk about in the 12-step program is to help another person, right? And you've done that, of course, through the rooms and through sponsoring people and things like that. But you also do that as and I'm probably going to say this wrong, as a certified ARISE interventionist. So I'd love to hear, and we only have a few minutes, so a brief version, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, and just let you guys know that Jack is somebody that I have always reached out to when I need to refer someone for help, and vice versa. We've always connected that way, and I would trust him with a family member. So.
Well, about 10 years ago, I guess I was retired the first time, and I decided to go for training for intervention, and to kind of do as a second career in my later years in life. And I fell in love with one of the models. There's 6 of them that I was reading about, and one of them was really focused on the family as much as the addict. And it was also an invitational model, which I shook my head and went, invitational? Like, you're going to invite an addict to come to their intervention? But I learned that does work. So it's called ARISE. It is very different than what people see on cable television, where they Friday night, get the addict out of the house somehow, and they all get together and they write their letters with consequences, and then they tell the addict that grandma's birthday party's at 3 o'clock, and we want you to come, and he walks in or she walks in, and it's not grandma's birthday party. It's 7 people in the family with letters on their lap, and then a strange guy like me. Well, in ARISE, we coach the families on how to invite their loved one to come and be a part of a family meeting. We don't even call it an intervention. It kind of is, but you've also got the entire family to buy in. The mom, say it's a 22-year-old girl, I just use that as an example. I have to have a commitment from the mom and the dad and the sister and the favorite aunt that they're all willing to come on the journey with this 22-year-old that's struggling. And she might not even show up at our meeting, because if she's mad that we put this together, then tell her, we're going to have the meeting without you. You don't have to come. And it kind of flips their world upside down. Like, wait a sec, you're having this meeting and I'm not coming, and you're still going to have it? Yep. And as a matter of fact, here's the guy's number. You can call him. And so they have my phone number to give to their daughter if she wants to call me and say, what are you doing with my family? They don't always call. But they have, it's like, wow, wait a sec, this is like, really, there's no lying here. There's no, underhanded stuff. It's all out in the open. It's transparent. It's done in love. It's done in care. And the family buys in that they're willing to do work on themselves. So I get as much joy out of flipping a mom's world around by teaching her different behaviors. And she's now maybe going to Al-Anon meetings and reading certain books about codependency and realizing I got to change the whole way I deal with this. And I'm helping that process. So when you see mom or dad or sister getting really healthy, maybe loved one person of concern is in a rehab now or is starting their own recovery program, but maybe not. But by working with the family. So And it's a 6-month commitment. So it's not a come in Friday night, do the ambush on Saturday and say, see you later, good luck. We got your daughter into a rehab, didn't we do good? No, it's 6 months of the initial meeting. Sometimes there's a second meeting in person, and then there's weekly Zoom calls. You've got everybody committed to doing certain things. You know, mom's doing this, this, and this, dad's doing that. And now we're going around the room and we're saying, so mom, did you go to your 2 Al-Anon meetings this week? Yes, I did.
Mm-hmm.
Which one, you like that one the best? What was the topic at this week's meeting? She'll say, well, it was about being powerless. I go, what does that mean? You know, what did you learn there? And meanwhile, everybody in her family is listening to mom sharing about learning about being powerless. Even her daughter, who's in the rehab, who's on the call with us.
Which creates a sense of fellowship that we were talking about.
You're creating a support group inside the family.
Mm-hmm.
But when the daughter sees that everybody's working on themselves and it's not just about me, because everybody used to point the fingers at her, if you would just straighten your life out, our family wouldn't be so messed up. Now it's like they're not supposed. If they call me and say my daughter blah blah blah, I said you're having a slip. You're having a relapse. Why are you talking to me about your daughter? What are you doing? How's your meetings going? How are your readings going? How's your workout? You said you were going to join a health club, and for 90 days, you're going to go twice a week. How's that going? So you're basically not allowing them to be the old days. So the Arise model is very different, and it's very gratifying.
Because there's not a lot of support for the families. And so, you know, even when a rehab does a good job of supporting the family, it's still not enough. So, you know, you're such a wonderful resource to that, and full circle showing the importance of that, because that was part of what got you sober as well, you know, is having that purpose, having the family, having the support, and changing that dynamic, right? Because not only is recovery biologically based, that trauma is then intergenerational as well. That trauma gets passed on. And the only way to break that is to change your people, places, things, your feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. And when I say it's everybody in the family, everybody that's involved in that, so that they don't continue that cycle and they continue that process. So I think we're going to have to probably have another interview of you talking more about the Arise interventions and all of that kind of stuff. But I am so grateful that you were willing to be interviewed about your story. And I'm sure that there's, you know, much more that you could tell, but I'm just super grateful that of any time that I get to talk to you, but that you're willing to share your experience, strength, and hope with someone. And hopefully, you know, something that you said gets their attention to at least take a look at, you know, this is what I could have, or I'm worth having something different, you know, or it is possible even. So that's my biggest hope for this series, is to share the different phases of recovery. Everybody's got a different recovery. You know, it affects every socioeconomic status. It affects every emotional status. It affects everything, you know, and just the opportunity to see there are different types of recoveries. There are different programs. There are different people that have different experiences, and to not only share that experience, strength, and hope, but also break the stigma, because it's such amazing. It takes amazing vulnerability to break that anonymity and to be able to say, you know what, I'm willing to put this out into the world. So I am so incredibly grateful to you for doing that. And I'm sure
my pleasure. It's how we stay sober. We pass it on. And if I can take a minute,
sure,
just thank you for all the great work you do, because I know you are a gifted teacher and a gifted therapist, and I am really glad that I know you.
Thank you so much. Well, we will keep on doing this amazing work together. And if you would like to reach out to myself or to Jack, if you have questions, I'm assuming it'll be okay to put your information in our chat here when we post this. And I have a free consultation. So if you have any questions, or if there's any way I can support you, please feel free to reach out to that information below. My website is lauridsen.com, but I will make sure and put that link in there. And then if you want to share yours, you're welcome to do that too.
Yeah, I also offer, you know, a free consult to discuss the situation, see if there's a fit. And my website is adesignforlivinginterventions.com.
Awesome. And that'll be in the chat. And if nothing else, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel to see all these other interviews. It'll also be on my Facebook page and all the other social media outlets. So I look forward to sharing more with you, and blessings to you, and namaste.